40% Merlot, 40% Malbec, and 20%
Sounds
Cab
good.
Sauv.
Tastes good for you.
Welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, the world in your glass.
This episode is brought to you by Collection des Anges. Ignore the fake news on Facebook. There's no shortage of rosé wine this year. Just in case, we recommend stocking up on Collection des Anges. This Provençal rosé tastes dry, fresh, and fruity, and it's perfect poolside with friends or paired with summer foods. Look for Collection des Anges rosé at fine wine shops everywhere and drink real wine with real people. Susan Kostrava, executive editor of Wine Enthusiast magazine. In this episode, we'll talk to lifestyle blogger and supermodel Veronica Webb about how modeling exposed her to the world's great wines, her favorite restaurants in New York City, and how wine keeps her beautiful and healthy. So the first thing that I have to bring up is the fact that you're from Detroit and I'm from Traverse City.
You are? I was just in Detroit yesterday.
So I would love to hear a little bit about when you were growing up in Detroit. Did you grow up cooking in your family? Was food and wine or food part of your upbringing?
When we grew up, my mother had grown up on a farm, and so had my father. So we grew up like very close to nature. My aunt had a huge urban garden, so she had 2 vacant lots on Cadillac Avenue, and she farmed everything from roses to collard greens to potatoes to raspberries to blackberries to cherries to peaches. I mean, you name it. She had a green thumb. She could grow anything. I have a black thumb. I cannot grow anything, but it was my job to pick, weed, and harvest.
So you did grow up with sort of a food culture, and a locavore food culture in your family.
A very southern locavore food culture. You know, I grew up eating anything baptized in deep fat because my parents and on both sides actually migrated from the South. So Georgia, Kentucky, Ohio, like that. So I grew up eating soul food. My grandmother did make wine. She made dandelion wine.
Really? I don't know if I've ever heard of that. What is that?
You take dandelions and you put them in a jar, and I guess you put some sugar in, and you close it up, and it becomes wine after a while.
I've heard of Italian families doing wine in their basement. I've never heard of dandelion wine. Is it good?
I mean, I was a kid, so it was nasty.
Right.
You know, when you're a kid, wine is nasty.
So I'd love to talk about your interest in wine, your love of wine, and how your travels, modeling, and doing the work that you do, how it led to and exposed you to being interested in wine.
Well, for me, fine wine and fashion go hand in hand. And it wasn't until I came into the fashion industry that I was really introduced to things like good wine and champagne. And I remember, you know, one of the first times that I was in Paris and I was working for Azzedine Alaya, who feeds his entire staff every single day in the kitchen. That's underneath the boutique and the factory. It's all sort of, it's you know, it's vertically integrated, so it's all in one place. And, you know, many times he does all the cooking himself, believe it or not, for 30 or 40 people.
That's incredible.
Yeah, he really enjoys it. And, you know, in France, wine goes with everything. So that was my beginning of being exposed to fine wine. And then I used to do these epic fittings at Chanel with Karl Lagerfeld that would last 3 days because, you know, Chanel is nothing if not accessories. And they would serve champagne there. And it was just normal that you would have smoked salmon and champagne, and it was all stuff that I had never tasted before.
So was it something where you would talk about what you were eating and drinking, or you just learned on your own? I mean, were you going back to, say, Carl and saying, this is amazing, what is this?
Well, you know, I was very quiet because I was in an unfamiliar world, you know, unfamiliar environment. You know, I'm from the east side of Detroit. My mother was a nurse. My father was an electrician. My dad worked at Chrysler. So, you know, even though we were cultured in a lot of ways, especially, you know, that had to do with literature and history and art, because I was always very interested in art and spent a lot of time in the Detroit Institute of Arts. the culinary side of things was not really something I was that familiar with. So I was always in a position where I was like watching and learning. And one of the things that Andre Leon Talley told me to do, who was the creative director of Vogue for a very long time, he said, watch the most senior person in the room and you'll figure it out. So, I mean, one of like a classic story is we went to Monte Carlo to do a fashion show for Chanel, and then afterwards we had dinner at Karl Lagerfeld's apartment in the Roccabella, and we sat down, and Princess Caroline is here, and all this, and you know, the wealthiest women in Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and
no pressure at all.
No, and I'm 19 and I have no idea. You know, I'm still pretty much on a fast food budget. And there's like 5 and 6 forks by my plate. I have no idea what to do. So I followed Princess Caroline to the bathroom when she got up. And I said, you know, hi. And she said hi because, you know, she knew me from all the different shows that, you know, she had seen me. And she's very gracious and very nice. And I said, you know, what do I do about I don't know. Could you tell me what to do with the forks?
I love it. That's great.
And she said, just start from the outside.
So I have to mention where we are, which is the Leopard at Des Artistes. It's in the Upper West Side of New York. And you were talking earlier about growing up with an interest in culture and art. And I think one of the reasons I love that you chose the Leopard is it's housed in a really historic building in New York. And we're surrounded by murals from the 1920s and 1930s. And this is also attached to the hotel where Rudolph Valentino and Norman Rockwell, they all used to live in this building. So I think it's when Veronica suggested we come here, I was really excited. So that's one of the great things about New York, though. If you think about it, there's history everywhere.
We discovered it on New Year's Eve, and they serve a fabulous New Year's Eve dinner. And then because it's right by the park, you can step outside and see the fireworks. And it's also named after a movie, I think it's Visconti is the director, called The Leopard. That's about the Italian Revolution.
Mm-hmm. If you have a friend coming in from out of town who maybe doesn't know New York that well, or you know is one of the types of people we just mentioned, which is a person who loves wine and food, mm-hmm. where are some of your hit lists or neighborhoods that you love to take them to?
Well, I love all of New York. One of the places that I love is Donna and Gabby Caron's restaurant. That's called Tutto il Giorno, because the food is spectacular and the wine list is very deep. And that's in Tribeca. And there's so much happening down there now in the financial district. If you want to take someone down on Wall Street and, you know, show them Francis Tavern, where the American Revolution was planned and where George Washington slept and a lot of the founding fathers slept, then there's all kinds of new stuff going on in the Oculus Center. So that's a great place to go down there.
I love that you chose sort of deep downtown, because I think there are go-to areas, obviously Soho and the West Village and all these places that we love that everyone tends to go to. But I like the idea of the financial district and, like you said, all the history down there, you know, and some of those great restaurants as well. And more happening down there, I think, too, in Tribeca as well. So.
And then in Soho, if you like Turkish wines, and they make great rosé in Turkey, there's a place called the Antique Garage. It's so charming, isn't it? And interesting in old New York, and the antithesis of any type of chain restaurant or something that would turn into, like, you know, a reality show. And it's always full, and it's always full of locals. Mm-hmm. The other place that I like in the West Village is St. Ambrose. It's a great place for everything, and it's one of the most kid-friendly restaurants in the city, believe it or not. Very warm and very Italian in that way, and every year my girls go with their godmother and her son, and we have a birthday party for the three kids. So it's just the 5 of us, you know, and we drink great wines, and they take the kids in the kitchen, and you know, they eat a fabulous plate of spaghetti. And then for uptown, of course, there's the Leopard, and then there's a Spanish restaurant that I like, which is called Andanada. And they have a spectacular Spanish wine cellar. It's tucked away, it's very small, it's beautifully decorated, great staff, and tapas out of this world, paella out of this world.
Do you travel in pursuit of wine and food? Are the two of you or your family, when you're doing travel, do you ever go to places because it has a great food or wine scene?
All we ever think about is eating. While we're buying food, we're thinking about what we're going to buy next. While we're cooking food, we're thinking about what we're going to cook next. While we're eating, we're thinking about what we're going to cook next. While we're looking at recipes, we're talking about other recipes. So food happens all the time, and we plan our whole day around food, to the point where it's very hard to be around us if you're not a foodie. So yes, we do travel for wine. We do stay certain places because their wine list is so great, like the Ritz in Madrid has one of the best bars, I think, in the world, and one of the best wine lists in the world, and one of the best lobbies in the world. And you just sit there and you can have tapas until like 3 o'clock in the morning because it's Spain. Why would anyone ever go to sleep at night? And drink fabulous wine after fabulous champagne.
What do you like to cook at home? Do you have any go-to dishes? Do you or your husband have go-to dishes that you like to make, either during the week or for a special occasion, anything like that?
So he likes to make Sunday sauce, and that's his Italian side. And then I make pernil and black beans and rice for him for his Spanish side as well. I make a great meatloaf. Because I have kids, so I make great meatloaf. I fry chicken. What else? I'm really good at making salmon, macaroni, all kinds of macaroni and cheese. And then I love all those food delivery services because they bring so much variety into your life, and and they remove the negative part of, or I would say the more difficult part of, cooking meals for 6 people every night, which is going to the grocery store and getting it home. Right. And then there's a couple wine stores. There's the one on 57th Street, Cork and Barrel, which is fantastic. And then there's another one on the west side, which is called Wine 67, I think. That's another great store.
So when you go into a wine store, do you usually know what you're there to get, or are you pretty adventurous in just choosing something new and trying something new? Like, how adventurous are you in your wine purchases and tasting at home?
I find the most eccentric looking salesperson in the wine store, and then I start talking to them. And then when they recommend a wine, I ask them, have they been to the vineyard? And then when they tell me that they've been to the vineyard, or they know that person and they talk to that person all the time from that vineyard, and then they start talking about the people who they know at all the different vineyards, then you know that that's your salesperson. The only thing I really don't like is sweet wine. I don't have a sweet tooth.
So even some of the great Sauternes, it's not your thing.
Like a sip, but then it gets overwhelming.
Do you, just speaking of that, do you have certain styles of wine or countries, origin of wine that you're really into?
I love Malbecs. I love Riojas, because they're drier and they're spicier. Mm-hmm.
We interviewed Veronica for the Fashion and Wine package that's just come out, and one of my favorite quotes that we use as a pull quote was you talking about French fries and red wine in your casket. Yes. And how it's a favorite pairing of yours. So do you have other sort of combinations of wine and food that you really like?
Let's see. Well, I really like spaghetti meatballs with a Barolo. I like salmon with rosé. Mm-hmm. Whispering Angel's a good one. I like steak and red wine with a Malbec, a Belle Carte salmon with smoked salmon and with eggs and caviar, a Belle Carte salmon with a big salad. That's always good.
Everybody asks you this, I'm sure, but I feel like I have to ask how you kind of keep living and enjoying your lifestyle at the same time. You have to obviously be very fit for work.
Well, I have one day a week. That's my pig out day, and that's how I pig out and get away with it. I talk about that on my blog a lot, webonthefly.com. I try different things. Right now I'm doing a ketogenic diet, which is no carbs, and you're allowed red wine and you're allowed vodka.
Oh, all right. Well, that sounds okay.
On the daily, and then you can have, white wine or whatever on the weekend. And I try to just do something every day, and my day starts every day by stretching, whether I stretch in bed before I get out of bed or if I stretch in the shower. And then if worse comes to worse, if I can't do anything because I don't have the time or I'm dealing with an injury or something like that, I hold plank for as long as I can. And, like wine and yoga are sort of the same thing, except one comes in a glass.
That's a good way. It's liquid yoga. Yeah. So they both help you relax. It's very true. I would love to know a little bit more about how you started your career. Also, was that what you had imagined yourself to be doing? Was there another profession when you were younger that you thought you'd do? How did that all unfold?
Well, when I was a kid, I thought maybe I'd be like a shoe designer or a doctor, one or the other. And then when I got to be in my teenage years, I wanted to model, and my mother always said no, which is the best thing that ever happened to me because, one, I think that the later you start as a model, the better off for you, just because your sense of self is much more developed, and it's not impacted by other people's opinions of, how you look or how much you weigh or how tall you are or if you're going to fit in or if you're right with the group or not. And then also the other thing, too, is when you go into business, everyone you meet tells you no. And so until you can figure out how to make it happen on your own without assistance, whatever it is that you're trying to do, you're going to hear no. And no matter what stage of your career you're at, what stage of business you're in, no matter what you do, you're going to hear no. I mean, even the President of the United States hears no. So learning how to deal with no is a great lesson, and I'm glad that I got it from my mother.
So did her telling you that you shouldn't do it make you want to do it a little bit more? Or did you really listen, and obviously you waited to some extent then?
Well, my mother's questions were, so if you want to do this, how are you going to start? So, and that's the way everything begins. I think that's the best advice that you can give anyone, ask yourself, how do you start? So I figured out I got to get to New York somehow. So I got a scholarship to Parsons. And then once I got to Parsons, then I realized that, I had better stay in school because without school, there's no way I could really afford to pay for living in New York. And then I got a job and I was going to school. And very distracted by living in New York, especially coming from Detroit. You're just not used to the amount of stuff that there is to do here. And then when I was working one day, a hairdresser and a makeup artist who both came in, and one of Eileen Ford's sons both came in, and they all suggested that I should start modeling and go into an agency. So I was really scared, but I didn't let that hold me back, and I went in. And every time I got signed up with an agency right away, which is very unusual. It was kismet. The stars aligned for me. And I'm always thankful for that because that doesn't happen all the time for everyone. And every time I came in, people were going, I could hear the agents on the phone sending girls to Paris. And more than anything in the world, all my life, I had wanted to go to Paris. So this was my chance. So I went with $100 and a one-way plane ticket. And a suitcase that's no bigger than, a copy of Wine Enthusiast with, 3 shirts, 3 pairs of pants, 3 pairs of underwear, and a pair of shoes in it, and a toothbrush, and left. And I ended up staying there for 2 years before I actually made enough money to be able to come back home.
Really pretty courageous at that age. That's a young age to be doing that.
Right? I mean, but, once the cork is out of the bottle...
That's a good way of looking at it. So actually, if you lived in Paris, do you spend a lot of time there now? Do you go back? And what do you think of the wine culture there?
Well, the wine culture there is, everything. I don't go back as much as I used to because the kids are bigger now. They're all teenagers, so it's very difficult to pull them out of school and away from their friends and stuff like that. But I was recently there. I was front row at the Victoria's Secret show, and I got to meet one of, I got to see all my, all the big loves of my life, like Azzedine Alaya and Karl Lagerfeld and all the people who started me in business, Ray Kawakubo from Comme des Garçons, and then also meet the new guard and hang out with Olivier Rousteing, who is the designer of Balmain. And that was cool. and then drink a little bottle of Cheval Blanc after work.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there had to be some wine involved in that.
There always has to be wine involved.
Now, do you find when you do go to shows of that type, is there typically wine being served at the parties and some of the events that go on around Fashion Week?
Fashion is usually champagne and white wine because, if something spills.
It's practical.
Mm-hmm. And, LVMH owns a lot of the companies, so the Moet is flowing. The other night I went to the opening of the new Dior boutique in Saks, and you can't believe the amount of Moet that was going around the room.
Well, that's good. So you were talking a little bit about early years of modeling, and I thought it would be interesting for you to give perspective on how maybe you think it's changed since you first started for young women now going into the industry.
Well, I think no matter what you're doing as a young woman, you really have to keep your head on your shoulders, because even though the world is full of good people, the world is also full of some surprises that if you can avoid them, I think that's what, you'd prefer. And I think one of the biggest changes is social media, and it allows people who are much more diverse to enter into the fashion industry. And it also puts more power in the model's hands.
So they have more information going in, I think, than they might have had before.
Well, they have more information, but they also have their own platform to promote and express themselves.
Can you talk a little bit? That's a good segue to your blog. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're posting on it and what the inspiration was for it?
Well, webonthefly.com I started because, one, I love to write. I've written for so many magazines, everything from the London Sunday Times to a regular column in Paper Magazine to being the editor-at-large of Interview to, Vogue, Elle, Essence, New York Times, you name it. And I'm fascinated by fashion and travel and food and designers and people, and I just feel like all the time I'm like bubbling over with all this information, and I'm a beauty nerd. Then also, women over 40 and women over 50 like myself, when you start to look at magazines, we're not addressed and we disappear. And there's so many things, that I want to share and talk about, because chic is like, that's not a young girl's game, that's a woman's game. And it comes, after years of experience, not only with fashion, but with life and work and
confidence.
Yes. And I think that, being over 50 is not forgotten. Being over 50 is fierce and getting fiercer.
So one of the things that we have done in the fashion package is we've paired wine and designers. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but I want to see kind of where your mind goes. So you've mentioned a few designers that you love. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Chanel. As one. So that would be my first one. If you had to compare the designs of Chanel to a wine that you like, what would it be? And why?
Okay, yes. So I would say Grüne Veltliner is her.
Okay.
I think...
Now, why would you say that Chanel is Grüne Veltliner?
Well, it's snappy and easy.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea of the tailoring of it.
Yes.
Which Grüne Veltliner is a very... I don't want to say it's lean, but it's got a very structured kind of feel to it, and it's very linear, and I think you could compare that probably to some of the designs. So let's do one more. Another designer that you really love.
Azzedine Alaïa.
Okay. So think about a wine.
I always think of him as Cheval Blanc, and part of the reason is they were doing work on the boutique over an extended period of time, and every day, everyone drinks wine in France, right? And so they had a case of wine that was in the courtyard, and they told the workers, go ahead, just drink what you want with your lunch every day, and they were happy. A few weeks goes by, big dinner party comes. They're looking for the case of Cheval Blanc.
Uh-huh.
The construction workers drank it.
Oh, You know what, though? They probably really had a good time with that. It's kind of not good for, for the people who paid for that wine, obviously, but probably one of the best nights those guys have ever had.
Oh, no, this went on for like weeks.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Because it was an entire case.
Okay.
So that was like the case they were serving themselves from every day. over a period of weeks. But that's a wine that they drink there very, very often.
So I think that we're all set. I want to thank you so much, Veronica, for meeting with me, talking about wine, a little bit of your travels, and I would love to cheers you. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
This podcast is produced by Large Media, LARJ Media. Wine Enthusiast is made possible by grapes, sunshine, and wine, and by the hard-working editors who bring you news and information on your favorite beverage every day. If you like what we're doing, share our podcast with your friends and give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. For more fun wine information, follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Wine Enthusiast.